Alright, hello everybody, welcome to our next lesson here. This is the end of World War One. This is for our unit, or the unit World War One. Okay, so take a moment there to look over the objectives and standards, if you would please. And our desired result: how did the First World War come to a close? Withdrawal of the Russians. When the United States entered the war, the Allies believed victory was in sight. However, the Russians would make a change that impacted that. March 1917, Russian citizens began to rebel against the war due to shortage of food and fuel. The Russian military refused to fight anymore due to its large amount of losses. A new government came to power and a revolution soon began. Communist leader Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, and I apologize if I'm saying his name wrong there, seized control and ended Russian involvement in the war, and you can see a picture of him there as well. Russia and Germany signed a separate peace agreement. The return of Germany. After the withdrawal of Russia from the war, Germany could focus only on the Western Front. March 1918, the Germans began a massive attack on France and were close to victory. However, the German military was weak and low on supplies. The Allies launched a counterattack, sensing the German weakness. Allied forces and Germans clashed at the Battle of the Second Marne in July 1918. The Germans were defeated, and the Allies pushed towards Germany. The conflict closes. Eventually, the Central Powers began to collapse. Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire were forced to surrender. Revolution in Austria-Hungary also led to problems. The German soldiers mutinied and public support turned against the war. Kaiser Wilhelm II, you can see his picture there, stepped down on November 9th, 1918, and Germany became a republic. The new government signed an armistice, or agreement to stop fighting with the French. On November 11th, 1918, the First World War came to a close. And the bottom picture there, this agreement to kind of end the war, you can see here, was signed a railroad car, and you can see the people who are kind of standing on the far left side of the screen. That would be some of the people of the Central Powers meeting with the Allies who were sitting down there at the table. The one gentleman standing up there, but that kind of gives you an idea, hopefully, I believe, about how this meeting kind of happened to help bring about the end of the fighting in World War One. Legacy of war. New and horrible technologies and weapons. New and horrible technologies and weapons. You learned about some of them. We discussed some of them already, such as poison gas and tanks and airplanes. War can become global as it spread around the world and became a global conflict. A large amount of people killed or wounded. I kind of explained some of my personal family history there with my grandmother's uncle. I believe his name was Thomas Macaulay or Tom Macaulay. One of her uncles, if not both her uncles, but I know for certain, I believe that her uncle, like I mentioned earlier, her uncle Tom fought in World War One and was gassed during World War One. Excuse me for any mistakes I made there, but how he suffered with that for the rest of his life. Nations fell into economic distress because of the war. War is expensive because of it, and also destructive as well. Speaking of that, many people left distraught over the effects of the war, including the soldiers and the civilians who had witnessed it, and even their loved ones or friends or family members coming home from that. And the peace agreement, which we'll talk about here shortly, created more issues than it resolved. Big Four. There were numerous countries represented at the Palace of Versailles for peace talks at the end of the war. However, only a group known as the Big Four would make any decisions, and you can kind of see some of their pictures here in the background. On the far right-hand side, we have the United States. That's President Woodrow Wilson. Next to him, on the left there, is Georgia's Clemenceau. And again, I'm trying my best with their names. Next to him is from Great Britain, David Lloyd George. And then on the far left is from Italy, Vittorio Orlando. So again, these Big Four representatives from these countries are going to decide what will happen after the end of World War I, basically. Okay, a plan for peace. Germany and its allies were not represented at the meeting. Russia was in the middle of a civil war, excuse me. President Wilson drew up his plan for world peace President Wilson drew up his plan for world peace in January 1918. It was known as the 14 Points. World peace and Wilson. Wilson had numerous ideas for how to create lasting world peace. He called for an end to secret treaties, freedom of the seas, free trade, and a reduced army and navy for countries. Okay, so he recommended all these things. He called for an end to secret treaties, also freedom of the seas, meaning people could use the oceans for trade and whatever purposes, free trade, and also, and a reduced army and navy for countries as well. Wilson also wanted equal treatment of colonies and colonial people. He suggested changing borders and creating new nations. Wilson was also in favor of self-determination, or allowing people to decide what type of government they wanted. Finally, Wilson proposed an international organization known as the League of Nations, and this organization would settle any international disputes to avoid a large-scale war. The beginning of disputes. When the peace talks opened, Great Britain and France showed little interest in Wilson's plan. Both wanted national security and to prevent Germany from building a war machine again. So both wanted national security and to prevent Germany from building a war machine again. The disputes became heated between the countries, but they eventually reached a decision. So we'll move on here from that. Treaty. The Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919, between Germany and the Allied nations. Wilson's League of Nations was also created. It also punished Germany by seizing some of its territory and limiting its military. The hardest punishment was called the War Guilt Clause. So the hardest punishment was called the quote-unquote War Guilt Clause, which blamed Germany for the war and forced them to make war reparations or payments for the damages during the war. Territories owned by Germany in Africa and Asia fell under control of the League of Nations. Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia became independent countries. The Ottoman Empire was reduced in size. Bulgaria also experienced losses due to the treaty. Excuse me. So here on the left-hand side, this is a map or a map of Europe during World War I. You can see, again, you've probably seen this before. I think we've shown this before, or you've looked at this before. But you can see, how Austria-Hungary was one country in general, and some of the other countries that we don't see on the map there. And then on the right-hand side, the right-hand side picture there, sorry, you can see how Germany is kind of shrunken a little bit in size. We have, Czechoslovakia, Austria-Hungary has been broken up into two different countries there. Excuse me, like I was saying, Austria-Hungary is broken up into two different countries, pardon me. You have Yugoslavia, and some of the other countries as well. You kind of see have changed in size and shape as well. So that happens as a result of the Treaty of Versailles and after World War I. Even towards Russia there, you can see some of those other countries as well. Leading to trouble. Many people and countries were disappointed with the outcome of the treaty. Some countries, even like Japan, were not really considered in the treaty or the agreement. Even though I believe they attended some of the talks, they weren't really included or given anything as a result. Other countries who had lost the war or surrendered during the war weren't considered. The colonial people in like Africa and Asia weren't considered as well. So this is going to create some problems. The U.S. Senate also refused to ratify the treaty and signed their own treaties with countries, meaning that the United States will not join the League of Nations, even though it was created, and this will create some problems as well. I don't believe Russia joins the League of Nations either, but again, without the full force of some of these big countries or support of these big countries, this organization is going to be very limited in its power, or in its powers, I should say. Excuse me. The lasting disagreements and frustrations would lead to the rise of dictators that would soon start another world war, and we'll be talking about that later on. Okay, so our closure. How did the First World War come to a close? Think about how the fighting came to an end during World War One. Think about some of the discussions and the debate, or debates, I should say, during the Treaty of Versailles, and how the Treaty of Versailles impacted different people and also different countries as well. And that'll help you answer your questions. Please try your best on the questions that follow, and let me know any questions or concerns. I hope you have a great rest of your day or night, and I hope to talk to you all soon. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.